Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Pinball Arcade. Today we're looking at Big Shot from 1974. This is a more classic wooden style table that is clearly focused around the idea of playing billiards, which is a little bit of a weird idea, certainly considering how almost certainly in 74, if you saw a pinball table like this, it would have been in a pool hall. But then again, maybe in 74, the pool halls would have been so busy that people would have had enough time to take a break and play a little bit of pinball. But yeah, it certainly does have some weirdness to it. I believe the goal here, well, let's, instead of me guessing, I think I've played this game before. Um, I believe the goal here is to light up all 15 of the balls to increase a bonus value when you drain out more than anything else. Alright, we can see there are no pro mode for this one, so we can't even look at the table. We're supposed to collect all the stripes, all the solids, open the ball saver gate, score a 14,000 point bonus, and score at least 50,000 points. So this is still going to be a fairly low scoring game compared to modern versions of pinball. We have here another flyer that I feel like a lot of these flyers must have been the same size and shape as the backboards, and maybe the backboard glass was actually held inside the flyers. That wouldn't be a terrible idea. Either that or they feel like record sleeves, which would have been very prevalent at the time. You can see that the coin slot for Big Shot is much older looking than most. And you can see the art style is very 70s. Yeah, that kind of wild polka dotted bright color art style has not come back. There is an argument that a lot of music in the 80s was created because of the vast amount of drugs that the musicians were doing, to the point where they were doing enough cocaine to change permanently the way they sounded, a higher, more nasally sound. I wonder if the art of painting and drawing was also so heavily influenced by drug culture of the old days that it created an art style that has just not been revisited since then. Let's see, Big Shot 1973. Well, interesting, it was labeled as 74. This table is a two-player version of the table Hot Shot. This pool-themed game is very popular among expert players and collectors because of the skill required to hit the 14 drop targets. There were only 2,900 units manufactured, despite the fact that the gameplay is now considered classic. Now, interestingly, if they were going to tell you that this is the two-player version of Hot Shot, then let's see. Oh, game setup. Oh, so you can change it. I wonder if I could have done that for other games. And then there's 63 pages here, which we could jump through all this to figure out how to play, but there's kind of no point in doing that. I am starting to notice that the black bumpers at the top seem to be a little bit more generically animated and modeled than a lot of the other elements on the playfield. I imagine that's simply because they figured the black bumpers were just generic black bumpers, and they basically did look like just a round circle of rubber. That's all they were, being screwed down to a point. So yeah, you could be a nerd, I suppose, and read the instructions, or you could just jump into the game. One thing I want to check back here, though, is take note that Hotshot is not available, but it would kind of make sense for them to have had a variant come out. Like, I know the way they bundled these games, you were buying usually a season 1 bundle of 5 tables. So, like, saying this, potentially having a bundle with 6 tables where one of them is just a variant on a game that had already been made available, might be a little disappointing, but wouldn't have been amazingly disappointed, particularly if Pinball Arcade had just been able to maintain enough momentum to continue to license things, license more obscure tables, less desirable tables. Of course, there's probably a case where it just would have never been worth it. Like, if they got down to the bottom of the barrel and they were just scraping for tables that people actually hated or that nobody's ever heard of. You can see some of these 70s tables barely had 3,000 instances anyways, as far as units made. So there undoubtedly were some tables out there that had that had like all but a few hundred units made. There probably are some custom tables and experimental tables out there. While this is a table that has a very empty middle play field, which is a criticism I think I will probably have to say for a lot of them, a lot of the tables, this actually plays particularly well because it is all designed around angling towards those shots at the left. We have standard size flippers. They feel like they're in the right position. No central peg, but very often when there is a central peg, they make the gap wider between the flippers anyways. It might be a scenario for a lot of players that they struggle to get the solids or the stripes hit, and this is like kind of a perfect table to practice flipping the ball from one side to the other. There we go. I've just locked up both of them, which that is a massive bonus. I got 100,000, 103,000 score very easily on the first table, where some of these other tables have been particularly more challenging. Also, these earlier tables that just don't have the same kind of craziness to them. So once you start to get like Star Trek to the point where you're playing like Star Trek The Next Generation, there are so many different things that can't possibly be one of the 5 main goals or a wizard goals. So there will just be things that that will just happen. Here we can see for big shots, they want us to collect all the stars and stripes in one ball and collect a special and collect 42,000 bonus points and get at least 250,000 points. Also save the ball with the ball saver gate. So those will be a fairly more difficult challenge. There's definitely a point here where you can feel that this is a really nice table for practicing small things. Right, So just lit up the 8-ball. I think to get the ball saver gate, I probably want to sink into that drop down in the exact center, like that. But that didn't do anything as far as a ball saver gate. So that must have not been what I was trying to do. Oh, nope, that's exactly what it did. The question would be, how do you reset all of the drop downs? I guess they just reset each turn by themselves always. Okay. So when I got the stars and the solids and stripes before, I think I did do that with one ball. Once you have enough experience playing pinball, you definitely get a feeling when you know certain tables are doable, or certain goals on tables are doable for you, compared to a lot of other tables where the requirements are just too high. I think it's a little weird that you can come out of that top drop spot without scoring anything. But it doesn't seem like that happens too often. If you are going to get all the solids, you have to get the 8-ball too. I could see maybe a few tweaks to this table so that there was a little bit more focusing towards the edges. This is also a very symmetrical table, which you don't see that much in pinball tables. They fairly quickly decide to break the symmetry of something. But that just once again points to the beauty of this table as a table to practice shooting left or right, making sure your fingers and your button fingers or your trigger fingers are equally trained. There is certainly something interesting on the fact that pinball tables are kind of iterative on top of of each other. If you get good at one pinball table, you're increasing your odds of being good at other pinball tables. Whereas if you, for instance, were really good at Call of Duty, that may not inherently mean that you're particularly that good or really improving that much for something like Counter-Strike Go, or say Fortnite, or a completely different type of video game. Yeah, a Mario game is not going to probably make you much of a first-person shooter pro unless you're playing the one Mario Raving Rabbids game that they made, where it was a first-person shooter, sort of. This is a very tingy table, and I could see this becoming fairly annoying to listen to, the sound effects. Of course, anybody not playing the pinball has a high chance of being irritated by the sound effects. But I could also see a lot of people just wanting to crank on some tunes and listen to their own selection of music while playing pinball. And that is typically how it would be experienced, is that there would be either enough general noise in an arcade, or there would be a jukebox playing music, or somebody would bring their own headphones or cassette Walkmans, back when those were things that people had and were proud to own. Um, but yeah, the sound effects for the pinball tables themselves are mostly there just to so that the game is not completely silent, or in the one rare instance whenever you win a free game they make a loud noise to tell the arcade owner that this person won a free game. So I suppose if the arcade owner heard somebody was winning free game after free game after free game, they might come check and see if you're ripping them off too much. Of course, that would be very closer to the 70s and the 60s than the late 90s, which at that point there was not really a real care in most arcades. If you could play all day on one quarter playing pinball, they would be more than happy about that. Suppose it is also worth mentioning that a lot of arcades existed later than they probably could have around the concept of exploitative leasing and crazy leasing schemes that occurred in malls in the United States. I don't fully understand it, but effectively, I think the case was you would get a fairly good lease just so the mall was not empty. Almost any store would. And then the mall would get a percentage of the actual sales that happen in that store, instead of, say, a flat lease or rental fee. Malls also not really requiring that you have particularly good air conditioning or running water or bathrooms, so that they were effectively warehouses that have been designed to look not like warehouses. And then at a certain point there was a scheme that you would move from one location, one place in the mall to another place in the mall, to get to that a new introductory rate on the lease, and then the mall would either refresh their appearance a little bit so it looked like there was something new at the store. All that quickly died out as soon as we started getting the internet and things reliably and cheaply shipped instead. There is still an argument for going to a store for trying on clothes or looking for generic small things that you don't know what you're really looking for. But even Radio Shack, which would have been a great example of eclectic small things that you probably wouldn't want to ship, just failed completely under the weight of a lack of interest and a an ability to ship even small things and get it refunded if it's the wrong thing. And even like the prevalence of electronics components, of which people don't really need because everything is now designed so small you couldn't even fix a radio or TV if you wanted to. You probably shouldn't have never tried to fix a TV unless you knew what you were doing. There is a prevalent amount of fake and counterfeit components for electronics that are sold online, but they're just sold so cheaply that if you get scammed out of $5 worth of components, you just move on with your life. You don't bother to fight it. Whereas in an actual store, those stores had to establish relationships with their customers and treat them nicely, because those customers could come back and they could complain and they could pick at the store. And there's just a lot of mess you can cause a local store. Of course, now superstores pretty much have figured out a way around that too, complaining about the quality of a product at Walmart, if they don't just bother to refund it to you, won't get you very far, because Walmart's managed to pretty much eliminate most of its competition. So, yeah. And there's just not a case of the good old-fashioned running somebody out of town because they're a scammer or they've irritated too many people in the city. That just can't happen these days. And I went on a kind of side story there. I imagine I'll do a lot of that as I start to just tune out my brain. I'm still fairly liking this table. Also fairly liking the fact that I'm just playing them for 30 minutes. I feel like I'm justifying my purchase enough to justify purchasing the last remaining tables. I should have clearly played these tables earlier, and I think I very possibly will come back and play some tables on rare occasions. Honestly, there are some times where I just am not in the shape to actually do a recording, and being able to just play a video game for me is something that I haven't really been able to do since I started my YouTube channel and became a video game critic. Everything became work, and no better way to ruin your hobby than to make it your career. There is some weirdness with Pinball Arcade and its achievements too, so I could see trying to get back at some point and actually try and get all the achievements. Like, it would be very hard. 285 achievements are left, because there's basically 10 for every table. I can definitely see how I favor the left, or yeah, I'm favoring the left side of the table a lot more. Eventually, I would potentially get good enough to know what the right amount of pressure here is to get that right in the middle. I still feel like the plunger, though, is fairly weak, and we may see that as a consistent issue. And there's basically no standard to a pinball table. If you were rebuilding one and reconditioning it, like, you could put basically any amount of tension or spring on a plunger, and you're almost certainly never going to run into somebody who's played that table who can argue to you authoritatively that you've made some kind of modification to it and it's non-standard. I bet even coming out of the factories, there was a very high level of deviation between each table. Even if they were consistent out of the factory, as soon as an arcade owner decides to make a change to something, or repair something, it immediately would become off standard, to the point where there is frankly no standard. It's just an average between all the tables. There are definitely ways you could cheat this. You can potentially reduce the tension or put a resistor on the switches that control the flippers. And there's actually some flippers that have double activating buttons. So if you press the buttons in a little bit, it goes half power. at a full swing on this. So the flipper would be all the way down and all the way up, and if you push it halfway, it'll go from all the way down all the way up, but at half power, which means it will take half the amount of time and act with half the amount of force, effectively, with that same velocity. And then if you push the buttons all the way in, that actually activates a secondary circuit that then effectively doubles the power. I'm not sure if they ever went any further in detail there. You could potentially put a button that measured resistance against a spring, and as hard as you push the button could be an analog input of like any thousands of different variations in which you could have a motor be activated. But at a certain point, that probably wouldn't feel much like a pinball flipper at that point if you had that level of control. And that might be something that would just not be appreciated or noticed by most people anyways. Let's see, can we flip to the other side? Not accurately. I'm not quite good enough to, or frankly warmed up enough to consistently be able to fling the ball to the other side of the panel. Which clearly that's what needs to happen, is I need to get better at hitting the flat drop down targets. This is an interestingly cheap pinball table, almost certainly a pop-up bumper. I don't even really want to stop playing. One pop-up bumper is probably, compared to 3, a great savings, and having 15 drop targets and 15 or 30 lights for those 15 drop targets is kind of nothing. So yeah, the budget on creating something like this was probably cheaper than your average pinball table for the 70s. That being said, I don't think that they passed the savings down to you. I haven't been playing any of these games as like 2-player games because that would be kind of silly. That is one way we could set this up to play more instead of having the breaks every 5 balls. But once you start playing with like 4 or 2 players or however many players you can have per table, you then are really just playing the practice, and it would be fairly impossible to remember what score like what score, what goal you've made. See, I don't know if I got all the solids and stripes there, or if I had already accomplished that goal, or maybe I hadn't done that in one ball. This is still a table where it's fairly easy to drain out, but I guess that's true for almost every pinball table. At a certain level, if you were going to have an in-game table, you might as well just let the player play forever and never drain out in the first place. There definitely is a difference to playing pinball, where you're actively controlling the ball, and playing something closer to pachinko, where you're just shooting the ball, and then it's, well, an old pachinko is not doing too much at all, but new modern pachinko games are putting a whole bunch of ridiculous visuals and graphics on top of the balls falling down. So we didn't collect all the solids and stripes in one ball. We didn't get a 42,000 point bonus, which I don't know how you would have done that. Oh, so you would have had to multiply 15 by 30,000. 3,000. Wait a minute. Oh, interesting. So, seemingly here, if you're playing 5-ball, the score is 1,000, 2,000, and 3,000 points on the 5th turn. If you're playing 3 value, the value is 1,000, 2,000, and 3,000 by the 3rd turn. So it plays slightly different between the two. And then just scoring a whole bunch of points, 250,000. I think I could probably get those wizard goals. And even though it's a 2-player design table, you can play 3-player. It kind of sucks that you can only play 3 and 5-ball. Probably would be nice if you could play infinite balls by changing this, or even play 1 ball if you just wanted to play 1. And then just no pro version for these tables, which I kind of have to assume that if there's no pro version of this table, it is probably because this table came with Pinball Arcade by default. I'm not sure if you actually had to pay anything to get the default of Pinball Arcade. I think you didn't, but it would also not really work as a game if it was just going to give you a bunch of demos that are like time limited, which I think is how the demos work, that you have like 5 minutes to play the table in total and then it kicks you out. You may have 5 minutes only in the entire lifetime to play the table. But yeah, it would make sense for them to have some tables free. And if anything, if Big Shot was one of the free tables, then it is a decent table to offer. Anyways, that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wish list. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.